The Prime Minister has told event organisers around the country to cancel all gatherings of more than 500 people to help slow the spread of coronavirus. Jacinda Ardern made the announcement this afternoon at her weekly media conference after lengthy meetings with her fellow cabinet ministers. Now, the announcement, which follows similar moves around the globe, comes before a major economic stimulus package due to be unveiled tomorrow. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, joins us now. So, Craig, what does this directive actually apply to?
Good evening, Lisa. Yes, all major events, indoors and outdoors, this applies to festivals, fairs, sporting events. The Prime Minister talked about religious and cultural events as well. So there are more than 100 events over this next coming month, with more than 1,000 attendees planned. They will all have to shut down. The obvious ones coming up, there's the Cuba Duper Festival here in Wellington, there's the Armageddon Expo, likely also to include the Book of Mormon musical, which is going on up in Auckland at the moment. There is a distinction, the Prime Minister said, between different events. For example, movie theatres and the like may be able to implement mitigation plans. So although the Civic Theatre, for example, in Auckland has 2,000 seats, if you had a system where you could operate at a smaller capacity, you could come up with some mitigations that could be put in place in movie theatres and cinemas around the country. For now, it seems like universities and schools are exempt from this. The Ministry of Education is going to be giving them specific advice. And if that seems odd, if it seems somewhat bizarre that schools and universities aren't included, the Prime Minister says that's because other countries that we are modelling ourselves on, ones that are following best practice like Taiwan, have not shut down their schools. And she says that she's listening to the best advice, the best evidence, and that what she's being told at the moment is that that's not where New Zealand is at this point. Now, a lot of people at home will probably have questions about some of those smaller events, things like weddings or large parties, which may be coming up, which they may be planning on going to. The Prime Minister says there will be more direction. She'll give more advice, more prescriptive guidance on that later in the week. Again, it's possible that organisers will be able to put some practices in place to ensure some level of acceptable social distancing so that they could still go ahead. But we're going to have to wait on that level of detail.
Yeah, so those are perhaps smaller events, weddings, etc., funerals. But we're getting a few questions here, Craig, and you might be able to answer this, or it may still be too early in the piece. There are a number of really big employers. We're getting some feedback on that, say ministries, factories, even where you work at the Beehive. So do we know what is happening in those circumstances? We know that the union is talking to Sky City, the casino, about the gaming floor, which has hundreds of people in it on any given night. What about workplaces?
Yes, the advice that we received from the Prime Minister today related directly to events or to gatherings of that type. However, she did acknowledge that there are businesses out there with large staff. She says that at the moment, many of them are putting their own practices in place off their own back. They're allowing practices such as people working from home and the like. Whether or not we're going to see more specific direction or a guidance from the government is not clear. Maybe that will come later in the week, along with that guidance about smaller events. Here at Parliament, the Speaker has indicated that there are plans being put in place in case it does need to be suddenly scaled back. If we need to have fewer MPs sitting in the House, for example. At the moment, they've just cancelled public tours here. They're going to be cancelling school tours of Parliament as well. But the public meetings still going ahead, same with the select committee meetings, and the public are still allowed in. So it seems like some of those questions are still being worked through.
Also, the Prime Minister took a pretty hard line around self-isolation today. What did she have to say?
She did. I suspect some of that was in response to the reports today of some tourists arriving into the country saying they won't comply. How is this going to be enforced anyway? Now, the Prime Minister responded. She said that she will be taking a zero-tolerance approach to this, the government issuing a clear warning. If you refuse to self-isolate, you will be deported. Now, down the line, it may be that people are required to sign statutory declarations at the airport, for example, which could carry large fines if they are broken. However, at the moment, the Prime Minister seems to think that the threat of deportation is enough. Obviously, it's a different story for New Zealanders, people who are here. You cannot deport a New Zealander. There are provisions in place. A New Zealander could be technically held in an institution and a police officer put on the door if it came to that. But the Prime Minister seems to think that the vast majority of New Zealanders are going to want to follow the rules and will do so.
Obviously, Craig, we've got this business support package that's going to be announced in full tomorrow. What should we expect there?
Well, we can expect it to be a significant announcement, a massive amount of money. The Prime Minister said today, in quite a stark assessment, she said that Treasury had told her that the economic impact of coronavirus could exceed that of the global financial crisis. The logical conclusion of that, a recession is coming, and that's the first admission of that likelihood by the government. The Prime Minister has said that tomorrow's package will be the most significant she'll announce. For perspective, she announced late last year a $12 billion infrastructure package. And she did indicate this morning that by significant she means in terms of consequences, in terms of import and impact, but perhaps more so than in dollar figures. But we're certainly talking in the magnitude of billions rather than millions. All indications are this is not going to be something like what we've seen in Australia. Australia taking a very broad brush approach, one of cash payments and the like. The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have both repeatedly described this as a much more targeted measure, a more targeted package. And what they mean is targeted on one focus, keeping people in jobs, cushioning that hit on businesses to keep as many businesses in business as possible, keeping as many people in jobs as possible. The thinking being that these more broad brush approaches are less effective in a situation like this. There's no point spending big bucks on tourism campaigns if no one is travelling. There's no point dishing out cash if people aren't going to spend it anyway because they're in quarantine. So expect a big focus on wage subsidies, direct support to businesses to deal with the immediate impact, and I'd also expect a big focus on health. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said that the health response is the most important element here, that if you can avoid a mass outbreak, a mass contagion, that New Zealand will better weather that economic storm. So much more to come on this yet, a long way for this to play out.
Thanks, Craig. That is our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, there with the details of the ban on gatherings over 500 people. This is public gathering events. Organisers have been told to put a lid on those. And obviously tomorrow we are anticipating this business support package.